everyone, and welcome to the Surgical Ergonomics podcast, where we will be discussing everything related to surgical and procedural ergonomics, the people, ideas, and technology that will help enhance your physical wellness and career longevity. I am your host, Geeta Lal. I'm an academic endocrine surgeon, speaker, consultant, and surgical ergonomics coach. Having experienced work-related musculoskeletal injury myself, I am committed to increasing awareness of and developing solutions to counteract the impact of poor ergonomics on the professional and personal lives of healthcare workers in procedural areas. Today's podcast episode is sponsored by SmartStep Surgical LLC. As a dedicated surgeon, you know that every day presents challenges, whether it's dealing with inefficient step stools or unreliable equipment that can jeopardize your safety and workflow in the operating room. Meet SurgiStep, the revolutionary motorized step stool designed to put comfort, safety, and efficiency back into your surgical practice. With effortless height adjustments and enhanced mobility, SurgiStep transforms your surgical experience while supporting exceptional ergonomics. One of the standout features of SurgiStep is their proprietary pedal containment system. This innovative design effectively eliminates workflow disruptions caused by pedals getting kicked off involuntarily, allowing you to focus solely on your patient. In addition to the step stool, SmartStep Surgical offers customized silicone mats which provide anti-slip and anti-fatigue properties to help you maintain your stamina and resilience throughout even the longest of procedures. So take the first step towards a safer, more efficient operating room. Use the link in the podcast to avail yourself of a 20% discount and set up a trial with them right now and revolutionize your surgical practice. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Surgical Ergonomics podcast. Today, I'm very happy to have as our guest Dr. David Berger. Dr. Berger is a former tenured professor of surgery and public health at SUNY Downstate, and prior to that, a tenured professor of surgery at Baylor College of Medicine. His current role is that of a physician executive and former hospital CEO turned digital health advisor, helping early-stage startups and healthcare investors navigate the complexity of building and scaling in the healthcare systems. With 30-plus years of leadership experience in healthcare delivery, he works with founders and VCs to bring clinically sound and operationally feasible innovations to market. Welcome, David. So glad to have you on the podcast today.
Thanks so much, Geeta, and thanks for that very warm and thorough introduction. I'm so excited to be talking to you about surgical ergonomics and so excited that you've actually taken this on as an important part of your career. This has been something that really has been bothering me for a long time, that we don't pay attention to it. And I'm so grateful that you are becoming the expert in addressing the issue around surgical ergonomics.
Well, thank you for that. And, I think as we've chatted about this before, it's high time we started paying attention to this. And so I would love to hear more about your story. But before that, I was wondering if you could share with our listeners your backstory, if it were, like, where did you grow up? Where did you do your training? And then how did you shift gears in your career from being a professor of surgery and then now with the work that you're doing with, I guess, as a physician executive?
Yeah, so backstory, I born in Brooklyn, grew up on Long Island. I was very sick very often as a child. I had childhood asthma from the time I was born, in and out of the doctor's office. And I think that's really where I developed my interest in medicine. Despite the fact that I was really sick as a child and missed a lot of school, I graduated high school at 16. I had skipped a couple of grades during early schooling. I grew up in a very typical household, suburban Long Island, but I started working at a pretty early age. Starting from the age of 12, I would work in my dad's office during tax season. I had my own lawn cutting business. I worked during my college years. So worked really from the time I was a teenager. Went straight from college to medical school, did my medical school at SUNY Downstate, then my general surgery at SUNY Downstate, spent 7 years in training to 2 years of research because I really wanted to pursue academic surgery. I had a lot of very strong mentors, Mike Zinner, Bernie Jaffe, Monica Morrow, people with really international reputation. So really had a strong mentorship in academic surgery. Then went on to do a fellowship at MD Anderson. Had again really strong mentors there. Charlie Balch, Rafe Pollack were my mentors there, and was planning on an academic career in surgery. The basic research, building a lab, getting into federal funding. My first job was in Philly at what was
Mhm.
MCP Hahnemann. I worked for Joel Roslin was my surgical chair. Unfortunately, Joel passed when he was 48 of melanoma, and there was a lot of upheaval at the time at MCP Hahnemann, taken over by a group called Allegheny, which is different than the current Allegheny Health in Western Pennsylvania. So they really ran the place into the ground. So I learned a lot about surgical and hospital economics, which really sparked my interest. I was recruited at that point back to Houston by someone I was in residency with, and to Baylor College of Medicine. I worked initially at the VA. I was the operative care line exec at the VA, and I really loved the administrative side of healthcare delivery. So I went and pursued a master's in healthcare management, and then really shifted my focus away from pure academics to physician, executive, and leadership in hospitals. Eventually was the COO at Baylor St. Luke's, and then the CEO to downstate. And through my leadership in healthcare, I really became interested in how digital health and artificial intelligence was going to sort of transform how we deliver care. And that's really how I got my initial interest in those fields.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing this really sort of kind of journey that describes, that physicians, people think, of us as sort of maybe unifaceted. Okay, you're a clinician, you're a surgeon, you're going to do, surgeries. But it just goes to show that we are so multifaceted, and you've truly had the whole gamut of the options in surgical career. Your mentors were, I was listening to the list of mentors you were talking about, and I'm like, this is the, veritable who's who stalwarts of surgery. And, I think your strengths and all the lessons that you've kind of learned have led you to where you are at this point. And I can't wait to learn more about, what you're going to be doing in this digital space. I would say that you've kind of shifted with the times, right? Which is what we need to do.
Yeah, so from the time I was a resident,
Yeah.
Bernie Jaffe was my chair, always said when
Uh-huh.
talking about me that I was able to see the big picture.
Right.
I think that's one of my inherent skills, that I'm able to see the big picture and
Mhm.
also see where, like Wayne Gretzky has said, I know where the puck is going rather than where the puck is. And so I became interested and active in digital health probably back in 2007, way before the big moves in AI over the last 3 or 4 years.
As I said, I think you had the pulse, as you said before, things became mainstream. From there, I mean, I know you mentioned that you were glad that we were having this chat today, and I want to share with our listeners that actually Dr. Berger and I connected on LinkedIn over one of my posts on surgical ergonomics, and that's what's kind of sparked conversations because this was something that was very close to his heart. We met offline, and then he shared his journey and his reason behind the interest in surgical ergonomics. And David, I was hoping you'd be willing to share that story, or as much as you feel comfortable sharing with our listeners.
Yeah, sure. So, as anyone who's been through surgical training knows, surgical training is a pretty arduous undertaking. Certainly, when you and I trained, there was no 80-hour work restrictions, but it's not a experience where the health of the trainee is taken into account. And even now, with 80-hour work restrictions, I have a daughter who finished training 3 or 4 years ago. Yes, the work hour restrictions are made things a little better, but still, it's a very, very physically and mentally demanding course. And certainly being a surgeon itself is extremely physically and mentally demanding, and not just on decision making, but overall mental health of the individual.
Hmm.
We've started in training programs to address the mental health and the burnout and the strain that training as well as surgical practice have, but we haven't taken a real hard look at the physical toll that surgery and surgical training takes on an individual. So, I work at times 120 hours a week, uh,
Hmm.
and no one really cared about that, except maybe my wife,
Yeah,
because
your family. Yeah.
she rarely saw me. But probably it's less than 10 years, I think, into my attending career, I
Hmm.
started developing spinal symptoms. It
Hmm. Hmm.
started probably in early 2000, about 2 or 3 years after I got to the VA in Houston, where I started having pain in my left hand. And I
Hmm.
saw a neurologist, I saw a acupuncturist without any relief. And finally, I went to a physical therapist, a very good physical therapist, who said, you have significant weakness in your left hand. And that was my first surgery as a patient. So I had
Hmm.
to have a decompression C5 back in early 2000. I don't know exactly the
Hmm.
timeline.
Hmm.
So that was the start of it all. Since then,
Hmm.
I've had two additional surgeries on my C-spine. I
Hmm.
still have symptoms in my hands. And then probably about 6 to 8 years after my first C-spine surgery, I started having symptomatology in my lumbar spine and having significant pain in my legs, and which required a couple of different laminectomies as well as
Hmm.
decompression.
Hmm.
So I've had total now 6 operations uh,
Wow.
on my neck and my back, and I still have symptomatology. So if I stand in one place for more than 15, 20 minutes, I get significant pain in my
Hmm.
right leg. And my symptomatology really curtailed my surgical career. So I spent 7 years as a resident, 3 years as a fellow, 10 years after medical school training, and
Hmm.
my surgical career lasted 20 years before I was physically unable to, stand and operate. And I was a surgical oncologist, did a lot of GI surgery and
Hmm.
a lot of complex pelvic surgery.
Hmm.
So I was in awkward positions, and this is obviously before laparoscopy and robotics. I was
Hmm.
very awkward positions for long periods of time.
Wow, thank you for your candor and also the vulnerability in sharing this story on the podcast. For our listeners, I'm sure you know that, if you pick up any episode, whether it's an anesthesiologist, a surgical technologist, mainly surgeons, a lot of them have been really vulnerable and amazing to share their stories so that we kind of tend to stigmatize our own symptoms and feel like we can't stop and can't get the care that we need. And, the objective of one of the objectives of this podcast and our guest sharing is so that we can start to break down some of those barriers around talking about these injuries and symptoms that can really affect all aspects of our life, including and up to, curtailing our surgical careers that we've spent so long training for and that we love, right? So, Dr. Berger, let me take you back to sort of that 10-year point in practice and then the subsequent 10 years when you were having these repeated symptoms and needed surgeries. what was it like kind of navigating getting time off, your taking care of your practice? How did you feel at the time, and what were some things that you wish you had known then, looking at it from the retrospective lens? Maybe that would help some of our listeners who might be finishing their fellowship or might be early in their careers.
Yeah, so I don't like sitting around. So after each operation, I was back at it pretty quickly. I was back at it within 2 weeks.
Because we're competitive, right? And we have to be the best at healing from surgery too.
Right. So 2 weeks, I was back at it.
Wow.
And my wife will verify this. I have a pretty high pain threshold. I
Tolerance.
never liked taking any narcotics post surgery. The side effects of narcotics, especially on the GI tract, were worse than the pain from the surgery.
Yeah.
So I rushed back each time. And like I said, I was back at it within 2 weeks
Mm.
each of the times. I think it's lucky that I was mainly based at the VA during this period of time because my director at the Houston VA was extremely understanding and was actually discouraging me from coming back too soon.
I
Uh,
see.
got me to file workman's comp claims, and so really, really supportive. I think if I was running a busy private practice, I think it would have been extremely
Mm.
disruptive. I can't imagine taking that much time over the
Hmm.
course of just a few years out of a busy private practice. I think it would have been really detrimental to practice. And as you know, a lot of surgeons on the private side have work RVU targets and
Yes. Yes.
compensation directly tied to their work RVU targets. I think I would have been really, really struggled if
Hmm.
if that was the case. But at the end, it just became really physically impossible to stand in the OR
Right.
for long periods of time. And I started transitioning to, I was a high-end surgical oncologist.
Hmm.
I started just transitioning to doing hernias and much shorter
Shorter
surgery
cases.
in order to avoid being there 3, 4, 5, 6 hours in really awkward positions.
Thank you for explaining that. So, when was kind of the last time you operated or did any of these smaller procedures? I ask because I know surgeons who, haven't been able to go back to, let's say, colorectal surgery or surgical oncology, and then sort of, as you say, sometimes are able to pivot their practice and keep going on hernias, gallbladders, colonoscopies, etc., because this is kind of such a huge part of our identity. And, I wonder if you could share how you navigated that identity piece and the pivot in your careers.
Yeah, so I stopped about 10 years ago,
Okay.
2015, 2016.
Hmm.
And that's really when my hospital administrative roles became much more all-consuming. So
Hmm.
I guess I could have continued, small practices, but then, like I said, after the last couple of operations, even
Right.
sitting for more than 30 minutes became really unbearable. So it was combination of the discomfort I was having during the operative time, as well as my shift in focus to hospital administration that led me to stop. And certainly I miss a lot of what I was doing, mainly the patient interaction,
Hmm.
especially as a surgical oncologist. You really developed deep, meaningful relationships with patients during a very vulnerable time and over a significant period of time.
Yeah.
So that was what I really missed the most about giving up surgery as my primary career.
Whether it happened by maybe happenstance or the career, the direction that your career was going in perhaps made it, I guess, less traumatic, if I may use that word, because you were going into something that you had already been building, right? The sort of a hospital administration career. So I think what I find when I speak with surgeons, either during workshops or let's say coaching or even, in the podcast, if there's an abrupt end to that identity and there was nothing obvious that they were pursuing otherwise, that creates a real sort of identity crisis. And, I'm grateful to hear that it was kind of a natural pivot and you pivoted. So,
Yeah, so I think you're absolutely right, Geeta, that uh, it's hard if you're just shutting it off and
yeah,
then trying to find something else to do. I pivoted several times in my career,
exactly. Yeah.
and so it was really a transition over
Hmm.
time rather than an abrupt turning off the lights.
It's not exactly the same, but I look at my pivot into surgical ergonomics kind of like that. It started as a side gig and then it became a main gig. And we will be right back after this short message. If you're a surgeon or proceduralist finishing your OR days with neck pain, back pain, hand symptoms, or just feeling physically drained, I want you to know something important. These problems may be common, but they're not inevitable. Most of us were trained how to operate, but we were never taught how to operate for decades without accumulating preventable strain or reducing the risk for a career-ending injury. That's why I created the Surgeon and Proceduralist Career Longevity Program, a fully virtual hybrid program that combines small group learning with individualized ergonomic analyses using your own work videos, AI motion capture software, and surgeon-specific recommendations. Just to be clear, this isn't generic ergonomic advice. It's a personalized approach designed around your body, your specialty, and how you actually do your work. If you want to keep operating at a high level without sacrificing your body in the process, sorry, just edit out this last section. I'm going to record it again. If you want to keep performing at a high level without sacrificing your body in the process, or are looking to return to the OR after recovering from a minor or major injury, reach out to me at gita@surgicalergonomics.com to learn more. And now back to the episode. So let's look at it now from the lens as, a hospital CEO. You were a hospital CEO taking care of your people. And because that's what makes institutions what they are. In your opinion, can hospital leadership and what sort of role do they have to address this silent epidemic of work-related musculoskeletal issues and injuries among surgical and procedural staff? And I don't mean just surgeons and procedural attendings. I mean trainees, I mean technologists and scrub nurses.
So I'm not sure the hospital CEO is the primary person
Hmm.
to take the lead on this.
Hmm.
Running a hospital these days, and I'm grateful I don't do that anymore.
Hmm.
Extremely difficult.
Hmm.
Financial pressures are overwhelming. The switch to consumerism, while important, has added another burden, and all the shift now with AI and how that's going to
Hmm.
influence healthcare
Indeed.
is another thing that CEOs have to pay attention to. I think what CEOs can do is support
Hmm.
initiatives
Hmm.
from frontline staff
Hmm.
in terms of as these initiatives boil up and more attention is put on it to help highlight it and to help support it. So
Hmm.
I think the people who really need to move this forward, especially on the surgical side, are
Hmm.
surgical educators and the surgical chairs.
Hmm. Hmm.
I think they need to learn and understand that surgical ergonomics are important, that if you don't pay attention to it,
Hmm.
it takes a huge toll in terms of turnover loss and additional burnout. It's an
Right.
obligation of surgical educators and chairs to start very early, especially at the trainee level, in
Hmm.
paying attention to these issues. So I think CEOs and hospital leadership have a secondary role
Hmm.
in terms of addressing some of these ergonomic issues. We didn't pay attention to the
Hmm.
ergonomics of what goes, surgical cleaning and managing surgical instruments.
Yes,
It's
yes,
a
indeed.
really challenging uh,
Yeah,
job, and certainly around the ergonomics issues and uh,
indeed.
and the OSHA requirements. But that, I think, is something that's delegated. I think we should pay attention to it. And one of the things I always had on my dashboards,
Hmm.
employee injuries and loss of employee days to injury. So I think
Right.
maybe CEOs can pay attention to the professional and especially the physicians within the organization and loss of days to injury. That's something that hasn't been traditionally on any of leadership dashboards. So while we pay attention to loss days at work from injury for our frontline staff, I think we should be paying attention to it for our physicians, because they contribute so much to any healthcare institution.
Yeah, the enterprise is made up of multiple people, right? Like you
So
said.
in thinking through it, I think that's one of the big things that CEOs can do is track that, make sure it's on the KPIs and all the dashboards, and it's potentially a strategic objective.
Excellent. Okay, well, thank you for sharing that perspective. I think department chairs across the country are, listening because we have now sort of the Society of Surgical Ergonomics dedicated to this cause, multidisciplinary society, multi-specialty society. We have, for the first time, chapter on surgical ergonomics in Sabiston's textbook of surgery. We have a SCORE module on ergonomics in the SCORE curriculum for residents. But it hasn't, that module remains kind of as an optional module. It's not a mandatory module. So I think, we're making sort of steps in the right direction, baby steps, if it were. But you're absolutely right. I find that hospital leadership, when the DEOs stand up and say this is an important issue of the DEOs of the procedural specialties, and, especially if they themselves have experienced injury, things seem to move very fast then when that sort of initiative gets in.
Yeah, so let me stop you there for a second.
Yeah.
So when I was at Baylor, we had several senior surgeons
Huh.
that had either operations on their neck or on their back. Uh,
Wow. Hmm.
but that issue
Hmm.
was never addressed. There was never a grand rounds, and never a discussion in any of the education committees. It was never brought to the attention of any of the trainees. Oh, okay, blah, blah,
It's
blah.
part of the job. It's part of the job.
Went out and they had cervical decompression. It's like, okay, it's like,
Yeah, no, I get what you're saying, and you're right. That has been our culture.
mhm.
So the other piece is then addressing culture change again through all the things we just talked about, these conversations, surgical educators, this podcast, articles, grand rounds, all the things that you mentioned. Now, having been an American College of Surgeons Board of Governors member yourself, what role do you think our sort of surgical societies and our and bodies like the college have in addressing this issue?
Yeah, I think they need to take a leadership role. I think this needs to be front and center at the
Hmm.
college. I think there should be ergonomics talks throughout the clinical congress, and front and center. I think it's been underplayed by the college and surgical leadership organizations. Look how long it took the issue of mental health, burnout, suicide
Hmm.
risk to come to the floor at those organizations, right? It took a physician and several physicians actually dying by suicide for it to become an important issue.
Yeah.
And it wasn't the surgical organizations or the healthcare organizations that took the lead. It was a family of a physician who died by suicide, who went out and did the hard work and pounded the pavement and got attention to the issue. Uh, I would hope that surgical organizations learn from that
Hmm.
journey and start taking some leadership on this issue. Because
Yeah.
the reports are 30 to 40% of physicians, especially procedural physicians, do have musculoskeletal issues develop during their career. So that's a significant part of the workforce.
Indeed. And in some specialties, it's as high as 90%. So there's more and more data coming out. I appreciate you saying and sharing that because I think our societies and especially the college are again starting to take, some measures. My personal bias is that the needle needs to move faster because we know about this problem and there's enough data that now there needs to be intervention. The American College of Surgeons Ergonomics Task Force has published recommendations and, we talk about that whenever we have these meetings. We've talked about them on the podcast. And they've actually held ergonomics labs, if you will, at the last few college meetings. And I think they continue to expand their footprint, but it's still kind of something that's happening in parallel. The surgical societies are, having these discussions and panels and talks. And I've now seen a couple of societies, I on the advisory board of one of them to actually sort of, have white papers and specialty specific guidelines. So I think things are kind of moving in that direction, but I would agree with you in that, they really need to be front and center because this affects every proceduralist.
So I would think the other avenue is training accrediting bodies, ACGME. Until ACGME puts it in the mandates for their training programs,
Indeed.
it's going to be hard to move the needle, right? So
Yeah.
until the 80-hour work week became part of the standard for the ACGME, programs were very reluctant to move towards that. I
Right.
think I think if you can convince the ACGME to put in their curriculum some requirement for ergonomics training, you
Right.
have a lot of the proceduralist societies lag in terms of their attention to this.
You've given me some ideas about who to email next, and I have communicated with them before, and it's perhaps better to start that discussion again. This is, and to your point about the accreditation and bodies, the ACS recently published standards, right, for sort of facilities and how physician well-being should be part and parcel of these sort of, I wouldn't call them guidelines, but they're sort of discussion at points and expectations. And so I'm hoping that the next step will be that in these sort of recommendations or standards, there will now be, as you said, kind of a standard for what should an ergonomically set up operating room look like.
Yeah,
And
until you have either policy or
exactly.
or training requirements hard baked in, people will not necessarily jump in and be leaders in terms of making these changes because they look at it as a cost rather than an
Right.
opportunity.
Yeah. It's a
So
nice to have, so we need a force function at least to hardwire it into the system, right? That's what I hear you saying. So,
yeah, so can you get OSHA to have requirements? Can you have,
mhm.
as part of Joint Commission, a certification? Can you have ACGME require something within the residency training programs? I think until you hardwire it into policy and accreditation, things will move slower than you and I would wish them to move.
Agreed. We will be reaching out to you as part of the Society of Surgical Ergonomics to sort of help spearhead these efforts. Dr. Berger, thank you for sharing your time with me this morning. I'm so grateful that you were willing to come on and share your story, as well as sort of your insights as an experienced surgical leader. And I look forward to further conversations.
I'm happy to help. I think, and I hope it came across that I'm very passionate about this issue. I don't want to see my daughter, who's a breast surgeon,
Mhm.
suffer the same way in the next 20 years of her career. Hopefully, she'll have a nice long 30 to 40 year career in her chosen specialty. But yeah, I think we need to pay attention to this. It is really a devastating issue. It cut short my surgical career, and I certainly would be happy. And I look forward to any opportunity to help you on this journey.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it very much. Please remember to subscribe to the podcast and follow us on social media, Instagram, X, Facebook, and LinkedIn. We love feedback, so please reach out to us for topics, ideas, speakers, or if you ever want to be a guest on the show. Thank you for listening.